Welcome back to a Munchausen's Proxy, where the Hollywood reporter, had the gall to follow up a historically bad year for Hollywood's business of entertaining the masses by publishing an article titled, quote, 50 Reasons We Still Love Hollywood, unquote. And with a title like that in the environment that Hollywood is in vis-a-vis their audience these days, what follows will be comedy gold. Or so utterly retarded that blood will shoot from your eyes and gray matter will ooze from your ears as you read it. So, entertaining either way. We should not let the authors of this masterpiece of illiterature go unsung, and so Seth Abramovich, Gary Baum, Kirsten Chuba, Lacey Rose, and Joel Stein should get the credit/blame they deserve for coming up with the following list. And those of you who are observant will notice they came up a few short of their promised 50 reasons. I won't stop at each entry simply because they are so patently moronic that commentating on them would take away from their idiocy. You simply sit back and bask in the absolute imbecility and/or narcissism of it. The Hollywood Reporter shills start out the article by outright admitting their shillery. Quote, after a terrible, no good, very bad year, an early Valentine from The Hollywood Reporter and industry insiders, including Aaron Sorkin, Oprah Winfrey, and Bob Iger, to a town we just can't quit, though we know you've thought about it, unquote. Right off the bat, the fact that they are ripping off a children's book for their opening does not bode well. Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day was a children's book written by Judith Viorst and illustrated by Ray Cruz that was published in 1972. I guess we know what Hollywood reads these days, and it explains so much. Then they go on to explain that despite the complete clusterfuck that is Hollywood and the superficial understanding of the reasons for it being so, there are still reasons to like Hollywood. They said it in a semi-literate manner, but that was the gist. Then they described the rest of their article, quote, as a much-needed reminder of all this town still has to offer, unquote, and that it is, quote, designed to help jog readers' memories about how lucky we are to live where we live and work where we work, unquote. As we go along, you might be under the impression that they think their sole readership are the denizens of the entertainment industry. Given the standards of entertainment journalism and the rampant narcissism in Hollywood, they are probably correct. But now that they have psyched themselves up to get into it, let's move along, shall we? First up, quote, we give social media something to fight about that isn't politics, unquote. This one is hilarious because Peter Biskind, the person they got to come up with this entry, says the quiet part out loud. Quote, since the silent era, a century's worth of movies has told us how to live, how to die, how to dress, how to behave, unquote. And that opening by Mr. Biskind is part of why Hollywood is a mess. Activists infiltrated Hollywood a long time ago, thinking just that. They wanted to use entertainment much like they used the education system in order to indoctrinate. The problem for Hollywood is twofold. One, the politics they have been pushing got progressively, no pun intended, further out of whack from mainstream America. And two, mainstream America saw what Hollywood is up to and revolted. Or was revolted. Or both. It is cute that Mr. Biskind thinks Hollywood doesn't give us politics to fight over on social media, since they have made sure that you can't go hardly anywhere these days without politics being injected into everything, including the sludge Hollywood is turning out. Next on the list is, quote, your comedy headliner is our open mic, unquote. This entry brags that many of the top comedians are based in Los Angeles, making open mic night at comedy clubs in LA spot the celebrity comedian night. This might have been a draw 5 or 10 years ago, but increasingly, top comics who do not toe the progressive orthodoxy that runs Hollywood have been leaving for redder pastures that foster freedom of speech. Joe Rogan, Bill Engvall, Rob Schneider, and various other established comedians have fled California for other states due to state politics and the environment within the state that have increasingly made comedy impossible. The ones mentioned in the article are mainly those who are establishmentarians and do toe the progressive line, like Sarah Silverman, Margaret Cho, Kumail Nanjiani, Tig Notaro, and Rami Youssef. Not exactly names known for busting your gut with laughs these days. And those that remain are largely there in hopes that they can eventually parlay their comedy into Hollywood lottery tickets. Quote, Donald Trump couldn't get Trump Tower built here, unquote, somehow makes the list. This one is merely a symptom of the town's collectivist Trump derangement syndrome. No comments needed. Quote, even mega influencers really want to act, unquote. Yeah, this one doesn't impress me much and is a stretch. More and more, it seems Hollywood is trying to use influencers to trade on their fame rather than the other way around. This was apparent in movies like Free Guy, where the director used gaming influencers in the movie to help prop up their credibility within the gaming sphere. That sort of thing would have been unthinkable a decade ago because Hollywood's ego would not have stood the idea that they need mere YouTubers, TikTokers, etc. to prop up their projects. The body of this entry also seems to be a plea for influencers to think about becoming actors, since they have built-in fan bases. It smells of desperation within Hollywood, and for a reason. Hollywood has destroyed the mechanisms for talent recruitment that used to exist, driving away those with talent to, you guessed it, social media platforms. Some simpleton thinks, quote, Angeline is still out there being Angeline, unquote, is something anyone outside of LA cares about. Sam Watson is of the opinion that, quote, because Hollywood always adapts, eventually, unquote. Watson, the author of Path to Paradise, a Francis Ford Coppola story, seems to think because past eras happened and then changed, that is evidence that Hollywood is adaptable. He is also under the delusion that the motion picture industry is the greatest means of mass communication ever devised. Quote, as long as Hollywood regularly produces a product that's better than you or I could make on our iPhone, that means even if we have to crawl to find them, there will still be an audience for it. Unquote. That's the bar Hollywood's denizens think they have to beat, something that can be made on an iPhone. What they don't seem to understand is that is not the bar they have to beat. And sadly, they are not even beating that bar at times lately. Those pimping motion pictures have been steadily working on proving Mr. Watson very, very wrong, as they burn themselves into the ground. Disney, as one example, had 7 $1 billion plus movies in 2019. In 2023, they had none. They will likely have none this year. Hollywood as a whole only had 2 last year and is very much in danger of having none this year, with the only prospects for crossing the $1 billion mark being another Despicable Me sequel and maybe Deadpool 3. Outside of a surprise mega hit, that is a bleak year to look forward to for Hollywood, and it is all their own making. They have, for years, been listening to ESG, DEI, and fan-baiting proponents, creating projects few people like, and then publicly alienating movie fans by calling them every istophobe under the sun for not liking their crap. Where is the adaptation? Apparently the fact that, quote, George Lucas has a museum that's not about Star Wars, unquote, should endear people to Hollywood. The Lucas Museum of Narrative Art is supposed to open next year near USC's campus. What is it? a museum highlighting art in various forms that tells stories. I could list the artists and the exhibits, but then you would probably be as bored of that entry as I am. So moving on. The fact that, quote, we're the capital of drag, unquote, made the list surprises nobody. Part of the reason Hollywood is in the doghouse with many moviegoers is Hollywood's attempt to indoctrinate said moviegoers, and drag is one of their favorite things to use to do this. Hence the reason shows like Drag Race and Generation Drag are a thing. This is one of those items in this article that shows that it is aimed squarely at the denizens of Hollywood and the rest of the coastal elite. And it is also one of the things that demonstrates the divide between the so-called flyover country and said coastal elites. They are pandering to a minuscule population demographic and blowing off a rather large demographic. Aaron Sorkin wants everyone to know that he loves Hollywood because, quote, my office is on the lot, unquote. I've got nothing for this one. Phil Lord loves, quote-unquote, award season, because of course he does. One of the prime demonstrations of the disconnect between Hollywood and their audience is award season. The ratings for the award shows is indicative of that, especially the Oscars and the Golden Globes. For over a decade, the Academy has been nominating and awarding Oscars for truly baffling films and performances. It actually goes back further than that, but it has gotten so much worse more recently. Popular films have largely been ignored until the last few years, when the Best Picture category was expanded to 10 films in order to be able to nominate films that people actually give a crap about. When $2 billion films are nominated, as they were in 2022, and everybody knows neither will ever win, something is wrong. They were only nominated in hopes of luring eyeballs to watch a 4-hour primp fest of out-of-touch celebrities as they give each other awards. Other years have been even worse. Some years, I have never even heard of the winner until it was nominated. If the movie was so good, why has nobody ever heard of it? Coda, Nomadland, Parasite, The Shape of Water, Spotlight, Birdman, The Artist, The King's Speech are all Best Picture winners in the 2010s that probably should not have won. Going into the acting, directing, and writing categories would take even longer. Award season is a clown show put on for the clown's own egos. Bill Lawrence, a writer-producer, thinks, quote-unquote, mentors is something we should love Hollywood for. Yeah, I'm not sure that is something anyone thinks fondly about Hollywood, except for maybe the mentors and an occasional mentee. Why? 2 words. Harvey Weinstein. David Oyelowo thinks, quote, our can-do spirit, unquote, needs praise. Because of course it does. He is under the impression that everyone is there to get something done. I do agree with him that it takes a certain amount of faith to write something, expect someone to give you millions of dollars to make it happen, and then, if everything goes right, it does happen. However, there are a lot of people in between who are less Pollyanna-ish and have more predatory reasons to be there. Hollywood is a shark tank filled from the sewers, and faith alone does not get things done in the cesspool. Quote, photographers on images they love, unquote, is the next entry, and it makes me think the authors realize they were not going to come up with 50 reasons they still love Hollywood. The entry is random pictures that have very little emotional resonance to them, especially black and white fender benders or a pregnant woman eating a foot-long hot dog while holding a Gucci bag. At least, I think she's pregnant. Hell, with Hollywood all in on body positivity, she could just be fat. Quote, we're the real fashion capital, unquote. The authors of the article seem to be under the delusion that Hollywood is the real fashion capital of the world. Given that they are one of the major proponents of putting men in dresses and slutting up women, not sure anyone but Hollywood agrees with that. Then again, New York, Paris, and Milan don't do so good either, given some of the straight-up retarded runway shows I have seen clips of. Not the best and brightest of artistic endeavor by humanity, and they are purveyors of body positivity and sluttishness as well. And Rhea Seehorn believes that, quote, the visual arts community, unquote, is something to love about Hollywood. Now, I will admit that LA is home to an eclectic array of museums, studios, and galleries hosting and producing a myriad of visual art forms. The art community in that region of California thrives. Whether what they produce is worth producing these days is an entirely different question. Donna Langley, Chief Content Officer at NBC Universal, thinks, quote, our resilience, unquote, is worth mentioning. She is of the opinion that Hollywood keeps reinventing itself, luring dreamers to the city and inspiring more dreams. Some of that is true. Each year, thousands, tens of thousands of aspiring actors, writers, directors, etc. flock to Hollywood in hopes of achieving their dreams within the entertainment industry. And each year, that industry chews up and spits out most of them. Hollywood is a vicious killer of dreams, even while it promotes itself as the dream factory of the world. Ms. Langley then goes on to wax lyrical about various of her favorite places in LA, even shrugging off the notoriously horrendous LA traffic in passing. Only someone institutionalized by LA could view the city with such rose-colored glasses. Bob Iger loves, quote, the power of one great idea, unquote. Oddly enough, Disney has seemed to be allergic to any great ideas for years now. As a matter of fact, they jump on every bad idea that comes out of politics, academia, BlackRock, or the World Economic Forum. Everything from demasculinizing masculine franchises, to butching up women, to fighting the state of Florida over whether or not it is a good idea to indoctrinate kids in elementary schools about sex. And the results have been the steady destruction of the Walt Disney Company. Disney used to be about great ideas. Under Bob Iger, they have been about shelling out billions of dollars and then making sure those purchases don't make money in the long run. See my ongoing series, Is Bob Iger Retarded? Quote, a fanboy can become a star, unquote, is next, and apparently the story of Evan Ross Katz going from megafan to Hollywood megashill is something to celebrate. I'm sure Hollywood does. After all, one look at the megafan videos for The Rings of Power and Echo show they love their mega fans even if they are anything but fans, and real fans find the videos cringe as f***. Then we have an entry about a maitre d' to the stars as The Hollywood Reporter exclaims, quote, Dmitry Dimitrov walks among us, unquote. The denizens of Hollywood apparently like the Macedonian immigrant so much they put him in their movies as, you guessed it, a maitre d' or butler. Hollyweird is weird. David Rooney likes that, quote, we get do-overs, unquote. He apparently likes that Hollywood is forever remaking good movies, even if it means turning them into bad movies, which explains so much about Hollywood. I will never understand how Ava DuVernay is a thing and people keep giving her money to lose. Probably that Oscar for a documentary complaining about prisons being used to hold criminals back in 2016 when people still thought it was a good idea to stop doing that. Anyway, she loves, quote, script notes from Guillermo del Toro, unquote. Apparently, Del Toro is the go-to guy in Hollywood if you need advice on your film. Why they decided Ava DuVernay was the person to talk to about this is beyond me. Again, I will never understand how she is a thing. Quote, "We're reopening cinemas," unquote, is bitterly funny. Hollywood is the reason cinemas are folding. On 2 or 3 different fronts. First and foremost, the crap they have been churning out the last few years has been nothing audiences want to see. The state of the superhero genre demonstrates that. As I mentioned before, it is entirely possible Hollywood will produce $0 billion movies this year. Secondly, Hollywood survived COVID largely because they were given a waiver by the governor of California, so they were considered essential businesses during the lockdowns. The only reason the cinemas did not collapse under the wave of debt incurred during that period was the government bailed them out. They had no such protection from the stupidity about to hit them in 2024. And the third reason the cinemas are in trouble: the strikes. The 2023 writers and actors strikes were the worst timed strikes in the history of strikes. The studios could not afford to give the unions what they were demanding at the outset, and unions should have known that. If they didn't, it is because nobody in Hollywood seems to understand how economics works. They were also mistimed because the theaters were just getting their feet back under them from the pandemic. Now, they will have to suffer through the release drought of 2024 as studios try to rush productions halted by the strikes. That the Hollywood Reporter has the nerve to write that they are reopening theaters is dark, since Hollywood helped close them in the first place. A few celebrities buying historic theaters to fix them up and reopen them does not make up for the past few years, or the scores of theaters no longer in business because of they have done. Quote, "Even royalty must earn its keep," unquote, is commentary on how the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are failing at being Hollywood parasites like the Kardashians. While Meghan and her sock puppet Harry truly are failing in Hollywood, the proper conclusion to come away with from that is there is something wrong with Hollywood in not reading the room vis-a-vis Meghan Markle and abstaining from feeding the woman's ego and bank account to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. Apparently, the Hollywood Reporter is under the impression that the fetishization of surfing by Hollywood's denizens is also something to love Hollywood for. Quote, "Catching the waves next to an Oscar winner," unquote, points out that multiple big-name actors are also surfers. Now, some of them come at it honestly by having grown up on the beaches of California or Australia or Hawaii. Many others, however, saw Point Break one too many times growing up. The Hollywood Reporter is also suffering under the delusion that, quote-unquote, "we've got the world's best bagels." They then go on to describe bagels that sound nothing like bagels, especially the fact that they have California'd the shit out of them as they brag on their quote-unquote super fresh farmers market toppings. From that, I can only guess that they are putting avocados on them. Rebecca Keegan is enamored by the, quote, "DIY charm of hiking with Kevin," unquote, an impromptu podcast arising out of the conversations between Kevin Nealon and Matthew Modine while they are exercising in Temescal Canyon. Such enthralling topics as what roles Modine passed up in his long career in Hollywood. The brainlets who wrote this article also think, quote, "our cults of wellness," unquote, are a good thing. While I applaud anyone working to get and keep in healthy shape, contrary to the cult of indulgence and death that is the body positivity movement, there is a reason California is known as the land of fruits, nuts, and flakes. Advocating healthy living is one thing. Making a cult out of it is distinctly not good. And yes, actual cults reel you in via healthy living. The writer of this section thinks polluting the rest of the country with the insanity is a good thing. Like everything in life, with moderation. If California lacks in anything these days, it is moderation of thinking. From the lunacy that is the health cult craze in California, they go right into the least attractive thing about Hollywood, at least superficially. And it is especially apropos that they include this in the article mere days after the plastic surgery blow-up concerning the vast alteration of the naturally beautiful star of The Boys, Erin Moriarty, and the attendant social media shitstorm over it. Quote, "We get too much plastic surgery, but it's the best," unquote, the writer claims. While the first part is undoubtedly true, the second is only partially true. The alterations we don't notice very readily are good. More and more, however, some of the most beautiful women in Hollywood, and more than one man, have decided they want to look like the freaks hanging out with the Surgeon General of Beverly Hills in Escape from LA. Far too many actresses allow themselves to be convinced to undergo plastic surgery to stave off the advances of age, real or imagined, or have so little self-esteem that they imagine defects that need to be quote-unquote corrected. The plastic surgery industry is a cesspit of morally bankrupt ghouls feeding on our society's narcissism overdose, with the capital being Hollywood. But back to the denizens of said hellscape. Chuck Lorre likes that, quote, "You get surprised all the time," unquote, in Hollywood, pointing out his discovering Jim Parsons when creating The Big Bang Theory. While I believe that is true, or was, the climate in Hollywood these days means that those with actual talent are being cast away more and more in favor of those who can help tick boxes on their DEI forms. The result is the slew of subpar entertainment that has flooded the theaters and television screens. So instead of good surprises, surprises of the opposite variety are ever more frequent these days. Batwoman, Naomi, Rings of Power, The Wheel of Time, The Witcher, Blood Origin, and on and on and on. The conveyor belt of pleasant surprises is much slower with its pleasant surprises these days, and those are rarely without jarring notes that can be traced back to DEI or some other Hollywood stupidity. David Lindelof must have been hungry when he wrote his entry, because his was about, quote, "the black and white cookie at Cantor's," unquote. Cantor's being Cantor's Deli, a Jewish-style deli near West Hollywood. And typical of a self-indulgent Hollywood writer, Lindelof spent 3 paragraphs to let readers know he likes their cookie. Also like current-day Hollywood, he somehow managed to mix both politics and race into a f***ing cookie. Nick Offerman went the other way with his entry about, quote, "humanistic, empathetic storytelling," unquote. What followed was an optimistic, almost Pollyanna-ish view of what Hollywood should be about as it creates and purveys, quote, "the best-hearted, most humanistic, empathetic stories," unquote, and, quote, "where we are slowly pulling each other along toward being decent to each other," unquote. Now, I don't know if Nick Offerman is on social media much, and if he is consuming his peers' posts, but, quote, "pulling each other along toward being decent to each other," unquote, is not what I would describe Hollywood as doing, especially given some of the speeches delivered at Hollywood award ceremonies over the last half-decade and more, in which they advocate violence against people who don't think like them. But it was a nice thought. The next entry is both macabre and delusional, both at the same time. Quote, "we know true crime," unquote. As if every other big city's crime isn't quote-unquote true or something. Or maybe it has more to do with the narcissist who wrote this not believing that the people who suffer from true crime in other cities are actual people, or actual people with stories worth thinking about. It goes on to describe some of the famous murders, including the Black Dahlia, Sharon Tate, and Robert Blake cases. If we could get Hollywood to tear itself away from the mirror long enough, we could show them many, 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 many other cities and towns across America that have similar stories. As a matter of fact, NBC has an entire show dedicated to such stories called Dateline. They are, sadly, not unique, except in that they think they are unique. Then we descend into truly Californian delusion as the authors try to get the reader to think of the copious amounts of red tape the government in the state of California has erected between citizens and nearly every facet of life as a good thing. Quote, "Our red tape doesn't discriminate," unquote. Only a collectivist lunatic would pen an article with a title proffering a list of things they love about their city and include the fact that the government requires a rectal examination in order to get a permit to do anything from renovating a home to opening a business. And then brag about there being nothing you can do to expedite the process. At no point does the fact that this is bad for business and makes everything more expensive enter the brainless minds. This entry also stinks of, we started running out of things to put in our stupid article. I can't really dispute the next entry of, quote, "The top podcasts are here," unquote. Why? Because they are. Los Angeles is the third largest city in the country and the second largest metro area after New York. The entire entertainment and tech industry is also located in the state. So why would the podcasts that talk about entertainment not be in Los Angeles? At least those who talk about Hollywood in a shilly way. If you're not on the studio payrolls, then there's no reason to move to LA. But if you are, or if you want to be in-depth and have access to anybody within the industry, kind of makes sense that you're in Hollywood. Did you know there's a big pond in Hollywood? Apparently they are proud of it too. Quote, "The urban oasis of Silver Lake Reservoir," unquote, goes on to extol the virtues of said 800 million gallon pond. This is another entry that screams, we are running out of ideas. Here's a suggestion. Write the stupid article and then count the entries on it. Whittle them down if you are wanting to have a nice round number. But no, what looks to have happened was they or their editor picked 50 out of their asses and they were left to come up with 50 reasons to love Hollywood, when most people couldn't come up with a handful. And they go from the random to the mildly interesting, if you're into fashion or costuming. Quote, "Our closet is 150,000 square feet." Unquote, goes on to describe Western Costume, one of the oldest costume suppliers to Hollywood, going all the way back to the black and white silent film days in 1912. I say mildly interesting because it is written like someone took a Wikipedia stub and threw in current management changes following the CEO's death, and propaganda bona fides as they describe how they are adding EV chargers to their parking lot soon, and mashed it together in order to squeeze all of the interesting out of it. Quote, "Nothing is ever really dead here," unquote, begins by ripping off Billy Crystal's line from The Princess Bride about Wesley only being mostly dead. It then goes on to list films that took famous filmmakers 10 years or more to make after they first got the ball rolling on them. Schindler's List, Gangs of New York, Mad Max Fury Road, Ferrari, Horizon, and Megalopolis. The point being that in Hollywood, a no is not necessarily always a no. With enough money, clout, friends, or experience, a no can become a yes. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes people say no to a project for good reasons. From that entry about persistence sometimes paying off, we go to more Hollywood narcissism from Rosamund Pike, who loves, quote-unquote, the billboards, mainly because they are giant pictures of the narcissists that populate the entertainment industry. Why wouldn't such love seeing 50-foot versions of themselves everywhere they drive or are driven? I am torn about Sam Richardson's love of, quote, the catering trucks, unquote. On one hand, I can appreciate good food, especially if it's free. On the other hand, the catering is another symptom of the Sodom and Gomorrah-like nature of Hollywood. Yes, actors are people who need to eat. However, do they really need catered 4-star Michelin meals at work? God forbid they brown bag it once in a while. Kieran Culkin makes Hollywood sound like a bunch of introverts, which I know is not the case. Quote, the really f***ing cool people here, unquote, goes on to talk about how the people are cool, but they are really hard to meet because you have to be introduced to them. So he is either hanging with a bunch of elitists, or they are just introverts. Given we are talking about Hollywood, which do you think it is? Yeah, me too. Quote, our loud, messy, endlessly entertaining lives, unquote. I should just leave that one to sit for you to come up with your own mental commentary for it, but I can't resist. Tom Rothman of Sony Pictures came up with this one. While the full quote is, quote, we lead loud, messy, endlessly entertaining lives, even when the times, as now, are desperate. And we must never forget what a privilege it is to do so, unquote. It is still a statement of broad hubris and egocentricity, even if he prefaced his quote with a saying from Thoreau about people leading lives of quiet desperation. Hollywood used to have at least a modicum of public humility, even when those who dwell therein were self-absorbed bastards off camera. In more recent decades, and especially once they discovered the intravenous needle full of the adoration and praise they crave called social media, Hollywood's denizens have cast aside all attempts at pretending modesty in favor of informing all and sundry of their greatness and o'erweening wisdom. They spend copious amounts of time lecturing the peons who support their style of living about how immoral, stupid, and or evil they are for not following the prescribed orthodoxy handed down each day via Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and the late-night talk shows. Yes, their lives are loud. Obviously. Yes, their lives are messy. Disgustingly so at times. See Amber Heard for details. Alas, very few of us find their lives endlessly interesting. That would be like caring about the life of the dancing monkey you saw at a country fair over the weekend. You are there for the monkey to entertain you. The second it stops doing that, you go find another dancing monkey. You don't stick around to obsess over their breakup with the dancing poodle, or whether or not they managed to kick their latest addiction, or why they beat their girlfriend to the point of having charges filed. That the media feeds the delusion that more than a sad, sadistic few are breathlessly following such nonsense is delusional. The only reason such stories get attention is the same reason people watch cars crash or go to freak shows. It is a there but for the grace of God go I sort of thing. Jerry Springer made a living off such perverse schadenfreude. What it isn't is a gauge of how much people actually like the vapid, imbecilic dancing monkeys who forgot why people paid them any attention in the first place. We don't go to Hollywood for advice about politics or social policy or really anything more than entertainment, just like we don't go out seeking musicians or athletes for that sort of thing. And music, sports, and Hollywood are all seeing the effects of what happens when people in those industries forget that fact. Oprah Winfrey followed up Mr. Rothman with her own brand of self-delusion. Or maybe it was actually ridiculously hopeful optimism. Quote, dreams really do come true, unquote, was Oprah's quip. She goes on to suggest that now the strikes are over and they are all still there means Hollywood really is a place where dreams can come true. What that ignores is that she is one of the fraction of people who hit the Hollywood lottery. For most, they never will. Either because they are less talented than they think they are, or because they never met the right connections, or they refuse to jump into the cesspool in order to succeed. And it is ironic that Oprah mentions the strikes in her piece because the writers and actors are in for a rude awakening following those strikes. The streaming bubble has popped, and studios are no longer throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at every idiot with a half a notion of a good idea for content. Productions are going to be slashed, budgets more carefully scrutinized, and greenlights withheld at a rate not seen in years by every studio, with even a modicum of intelligence as the movie and television business adjusts to two different factors. One, that streaming is not the pot of gold at the end of the entertainment rainbow. It is a mirage. Streaming cannot sustain the levels of production seen during the COVID years and slightly before. The money is simply not there. The second factor is that every industry big tech touches is destroyed. The music industry was first in the 1990s. Publishing came next as book publishers were slowly whittled down by Amazon and others, driving the booksellers out of business. Print media was next as paper after paper and magazine after magazine went under or adapted to survive and shrunk in its influence. Now, it's Hollywood's turn. The irony in Hollywood never ends because they brought it on themselves. They invited big tech's money into the industry, and now two studios holding up the floundering Hollywood are Amazon and Apple, neither of which really care if Hollywood survives or not. Entertainment is not their core business. Both companies could shutter their studios tomorrow and actually be more financially secure doing so. They are vanity projects created by Jeff Bezos and Tim Cook. As bad as things are in Hollywood post-strike, they would be drastically worse should those two companies pull out. For some reason, quote, Ike Barinholtz's dad, unquote, is the next entry. I had to Google who the f*** Ike Barinholt was. Then I had to Google his f***ing dad. And now I have two pieces of useless information in my head and have lost a minute and a half of my life that I am not getting back. And I did it so you don't have to. Trust me, it isn't worth it. Moving on. Quote, John Hamm actually sits in the John Hamm booth, unquote. This is just more Hollywood being Hollywood. The next entry is a symptom of the mental retardation and degeneracy of meritocracy that has flowed out of California. Quote, we give an award for everything, unquote. And if you think they are kidding, you have never perused the Wikipedia pages of movies, television shows, the actors in said productions, and the people involved in making them happen. They really do give an award for everything, whether the recipients deserve them or not. And more recently, it falls in the not category for the more well-known awards like Oscars and Golden Globes. The writers of the article are under the impression that superfluous award giving hurts nobody, and for the most part, that is true. However, once everybody is getting awards, awards themselves lose all meaning. Taylor Swift's f***ing cat got an award at the Kids' Choice Awards for f***'s sake. Joel Stein put his name on the penultimate entry. Quote, Rick Caruso. His malls anyway, unquote. Apparently Joel found the idea of his son wanting to go to the mall to hang out with friends shocking. He then goes on to say that the only two cool malls are the creation of real estate mogul Rick Caruso, a local boy born right there in Los Angeles. Why this would merit entry into such an article is beyond me, other than to demonstrate the materialistic obsession that inflicts Hollywood's denizens. The last, and ironically the most delusional entry is, quote, everyone hates us, so we must be doing something right, unquote. The mentally maladjusted writer then goes on to point out that the right hates Hollywood for propagandizing for leftist causes, and the left hates Hollywood because white men running the studios don't let them propagandize enough. half of that reasoning is correct. The first half. The second half, as I said, is delusional. The left loves Hollywood because they know nearly everyone in the industry is either with them or being scared into silence. And if anyone who is not with them is outed, they are immediately ostracized, placed on the blacklist of heretics who have betrayed the cultists infesting the place. The writers note that everyone says there is nothing on TV, but still talk about what we should watch. And there are no more movie stars, but still go to see everything Margot Robbie is in. And actors are self-congratulatory blowhards, but still watch awards shows. And thus we were given a demonstration of the delusion. Just because people watch television or talk about shows does not demonstrate Hollywood's appeal. It shows that people look for entertainment, and some of what Hollywood turns out is still entertaining enough to be worth discussing. More often than not these days, however, it is the exact opposite. More and more people discuss the complete train wreck of a show or movie, warning their friends and colleagues away from wasting their time and money. They are canaries in the coal mine of retardation that much of Hollywood has become. There are no movie stars left, except maybe Tom Cruise. A movie star is someone who, just by attaching their name to a project, can muscle said project into a successful release to the public. No, Margot Robbie is not a movie star, and anyone who goes to see everything she is in needs to seek help. See Birds of Prey and the fantabulous emancipation of one Harley Quinn for details. Yes, much of the blame goes to the writer and the director, but not all. As for awards shows, apparently the writers of the article have not been keeping an eye on the dwindling viewership numbers for all of the award shows over the past decade or more. Things got so bad one of the award shows went streaming only due to low ratings, and the network not wanting to lose 4 hours of ad revenue when they could air shows that would bring in better ratings and thusly better ad clientele. Award shows have devolved into Hollywood lecture sessions, 4-hour-long lecture sessions with unfunny comedians hosting. If Hollywood wanted people to watch their struggle sessions with the American people, they would get Ricky Gervais to host all of them and get him a case of whatever he was drinking during the 2020 Golden Globes, wherein he took a verbal flamethrower to the crowd, making more than one celebrity present look extremely uncomfortable. The Oscars' viewership collapse has only abated because people are tuning in with the hope that someone will bitch slap the host again. It is that simple. No, we don't like you, in general, and have only yourselves to blame. Hollywood used to be fairly well esteemed by the general public in the US and around the world. Now, the denizens of Hollywood have ripped off their masks via social media, and there is no mystique. Hollywood has, in general, forgotten the benefits of mystique, both in their public image protection and in their writing. The farther to the left politically Hollywood has got in their public statements, the farther behind they have left the rest of the public. And award shows punctuated that split. That the beliefs and politics of Hollywood have so completely infused so much of what is produced by them does not help. In the past, we could ignore the fact that our favorite actors, directors, and writers were raging communists. Now, that is not possible, since they now have Hank Pym advocating for communism in Marvel movies and characters in HBO series extolling the benefits of communism rather boldly. And communism is one of the easier things to ignore that they push through both their entertainment and their public statements. So no, you are not doing something right if everybody hates you. The only reason you think that is because you dwell within the ideological bubble that surrounds the coastal elite, especially Hollywood and big tech out in California. This article was an insight into the delusionary hubris and narcissism that dominates those in Hollywood. Very few of the entries were anything that would appeal to or be understood by someone not within the entertainment industry or living fairly well off in Southern California. There were several pats on the back, many random idiocies, and more than one attempt at refuting the general sentiment the world has towards Hollywood. And by this point, that feeling is global. China, Europe, Oceania, and Latin America are all increasingly sick of the cultural imperialism implicit in Hollywood, its productions, and its denizens' statements to the press and on social media. It has gotten to the point that the communist Chinese government is fed up and has been cracking down on the films and television shows available to the Chinese people, ramping up the development of China's domestic entertainment industry. Other nations in Asia, Europe, and isolated parts of Africa, Latin America, and Australia have also made their presence known in the face of the decline of Hollywood's quality and their increase in propagandizing in movies and television shows they release. And Hollywood is worried. If they weren't, articles that read as being as desperate as this one is would not be appearing mere weeks after the end of the worst year in recent Hollywood history. That is all I have for this video. If you liked the video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, share the video, and comment down below. It is really appreciated and helps the video get better viewership. Next up will probably be part 4 of Is Bob Iger Retarded?, featuring a deep dive into the recent collapse and chaos at Marvel Studios. It will be less extensive than part 3 because I have already covered Marvel in a couple of other videos involving their fall and how to fix them. Until then, tschüss.